Morning, Stuart.
Le-
Following your appearance on the Doctor's Kitchen with Dr. Rupy, which I saw is now on YouTube as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we've had a few of our members and also prospective clients get in touch with questions around dementia, because that's obviously a topic that you touched on the podcast. So given that we've had a few questions, I just wanted to kind of throw some of them your way to make sure we're giving out the right information as well. So is that okay with you?
Yep, absolutely.
Right. So first of all, very fundamentally, just what is dementia?
Sure. But it's the gradual progression and decline of brain function. Now, within the brain, you end up having the loss of synaptic connections and ultimately brain cells and neurons die. And this actually then, so to characterize something as dementia, you need to see the loss of two broad cognitive functions and then ultimately the loss of the ability of an individual to live a normal life. So classically, people think of memory, so memory loss. But more broadly, we can have neuropsychiatric functions, so people can have hallucinations. This is particularly associated with a type of dementia called Lewy body dementia. You have loss of episodic memory. You have sort of the ability or the lack of ability to pay attention to things. So watching TV is very difficult for people with dementia. Motor sensory function goes, so your ability to coordinate. If you know people with dementia, they struggle to start to put clothes on. Putting a belt on becomes a very difficult process. And then some of the social cognition, language, people can actually lose the ability to remember the names of items. So but there's a broad set of cognitive symptoms in dementia, and many people will have experienced it through parents and grandparents, and you'll be able to recognize these different facets of cognitive decline in these individuals.
Okay, so if those are the symptoms, what's actually going on in the brain to bring them on?
Sure. So if you think about a healthy brain, so when you're very young, you have lots of synaptic plasticity. You've created new neurons, lots of new connections, and this is, to enable a young person to come into the world and adapt to the environment around it. And as you get older, your ability to produce new neurons lessens. There are a few regions of the brain that actually continue to produce neurons, one of them being the hippocampus, but also the synaptic plasticity. So this is so you have a neuron and these neurons will connect to each other. When you're very young, synaptic plasticity is off the scale. You can, you probably remember learning things as a kid that are still, songs that are ingrained in your head today. But, I've read books 2 weeks ago. Can I only remember half the characters in it? So we still have plasticity. We still have the ability to remodel our brains, but it's to a lesser extent. So as you age, the brain gets less able to adapt to new challenges and less enabled to learn. Now, let's think about it in terms of dementia. So Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. What occurs with Alzheimer's is over time, so over 20, 30 years, you get a progressive buildup of proteins, toxic proteins in and around the neurons. And this over time drives neuroinflammatory processes that actually accelerate the aging of the brain. So again, this can be increasing neuroinflammatory processes. It can stop these synapses from connecting to each other and actually lead to the degeneration of certain synapses, so these connections in the brain. And ultimately, this disrupts synaptic transmission, and you will get the loss of pockets of neurons in the brain. So I think the Alzheimer's Society quote that the brain loses the weight of an orange throughout the progressive period of dementia, particularly with Alzheimer's. So you're losing grey matter, all the time in the process.
And then in terms of the actual onset of dementia, are there any particular, like lifestyle or environmental risk factors that can increase someone's risk of developing dementia?
Sure, yeah. So broadly, you'll have conditions such as diabetes, hearing loss, high blood pressure, very much impact it. As is becoming more and more sort of obvious in the media, we are seeing how the impact of brain trauma can lead to the acceleration or the formation of neurodegeneration, including dementia. You see this with rugby players, American football players. I think lacrosse as well is a sport where there's lots of head impact. Boxing, of course. So brain trauma and the inflammatory processes that occur with that lead to premature cell death. Infection, that's something as well where if you can have a significant infection, you can get the interaction with the astrocytes and the brain. So these are cells that sit around the neurons and support their function over time. Also involved in the process of immunity in the brain. These actually concede some of the processes that actually lead to dementia too. And of course, there's genetics. Genetics can increase your risk, as we well know, being at FitnessGenes is something we study.
And any genes in particular then, in that case?
Yes, so this carve it into two. There's the early onset form of dementia, which is the familial form. So these are generally quite aggressive. They're early onset. So they can onset anything from the age of 45. And these are rare mutations, and they're generally dominant, which means if you have one of the mutations, you're likely to present with the disease. And people will generally know when this runs in the family because it'll be generation after generation of early onset dementia. And these are mutations in amyloid precursor protein. So that's the protein that is then cleaved to produce the amyloid plaques that seed the degenerative processes in the brain. Another one is in one of the processing proteins, presenilin, which is got there eventually, which is part of that process. And then there's the second part, which we more look at FitnessGenes, is what is known as sporadic, and this is associated with a protein that's reasonably well known now called APOE. So APOE is a protein is solved in lipids metabolism. Every brain has it, but there are three versions of the APOE protein, and you have three genetic versions. So there's APOE4, which is linked to increased risk. There's APOE3, which is linked to sort of general risk, and then there's APOE2. Now we've had, I think one of the questions we had on the back of the podcast was people don't really talk about APOE2. Which is supposed to have a protective risk, and this is quite pronounced in certain ethnicities, but not in others. So let's just think about this generally in terms of the risk. So if you have two versions of APOE4, this is a 9 to 12 times increase in risk. If you have one version of APOE4, it's about a 2 to 3 times risk. Now, if you have an APOE3 and an APOE2, you actually halve your risk in general. However, because of different genetic backgrounds and different ethnicities, these things can change. So the prevalence of risk of APOE4 and APOE4 is very high in East Asians and then whites, but less so in blacks and then Hispanics. Now, if we think about the protective properties of APOE2, it's seen very much in white people, but not necessarily East Asians and people from African backgrounds. And with Hispanics, it's only protective if you have an APOE4. So if you have an increased risk allele, it protects in relation to APOE4. So APOE2 is protective, but it's very much ethnicity dependent. And this is believed because different populations have different mutations that sit around where the APOE gene is, and these can actually alter the way the APOE is expressed in the different cell types. So it's quite of a complex interaction. But generally, if you have two APOE4s, your risk is very much increased, and that is overall ethnicities, even though if you're East Asian and white, it is a lot higher. APOE2 is protective in certain ethnicities, and this generally seems to be seen in white, in some African populations, and in Hispanics, only when you're carrying the APOE4 risk variant to start with.
Okay.
I hope that broadly makes sense.
So, I mean, APOE is quite interesting because I see quite a few people come to us and say they ask specifically about that APOE result because, I mean, it's been popularized by people like Chris Hemsworth, who discovered his result. But then we also have people who say, I really don't want to know my risk of dementia or any type of disease in that case. So how do we actually balance out kind of the fact that APOE is included within our reporting, but also filtering it based on the information that we can give people as well?
Sure. No, I think this is a really interesting point, and it kind of it's linked to a more broad conversation within genetic testing in general, that there are these variants that A, are known to confer risk, and B, there are modifiable things to do about it. We'll talk about in a second. But also there's the right for people to live the life they want to. This is moving into the Western democracy, libertarian conversations. But generally, some people may not want to know, and we know this because people get in contact with us and say this, and they just want to live their life up until the point of disease. Now, we can have a broad argument about this in terms of the individual versus society, but I don't think this is for this conversation. But the way we deal with our reports at the moment is APOE sits within our suite of traits. However, we talk about it in general risk to cognitive decline. We are not linking the APOE4 alleles to a dementia. So if you buy our product at the moment, there will not be your APOE4, or your APOE4, APOE3. We just talk about the risk more general and then give you advice around that. Now, we have people that come to our help desk, and we have clinicians within the company that actually say, listen, I really want to know because it's something I would want to add significant changes to my lifestyle around that point. And I think this is one of the key issues for me where you're releasing genetic information to individuals within the direct to consumer space that we sit. We need to be giving people information that they can then do something about. Now, APOE 4 is very much one of those variants. So let's talk about it in two parts. One, if you're APOE4, there's a 100% chance you'll have a build-up over time of the amyloid protein in the brain that causes and seeds the neurodegeneration. However, this doesn't mean you're going to present with dementia clinically. So what does that look like? It's loss of memory. There's the classical test for someone with dementia is to get them to draw a clock. Now you think about, as you sit here today, we can put the numbers on the clock and everything, and that's something that the dementia patient fails to do. Now you're not seeing those movements to cognitive decline in all the patients. I think APOE4 is around 40 to 50% of the people with it will end up with dementia by the age of 85. So it's a significant number, but there are modifiable factors associated with it. So I guess what are these? Managing blood pressure, managing diabetes symptoms. So more broadly, if you're trying to lower your blood pressure, if this is a problem, there are very many lifestyle lifestyle changes you can make to reduce blood pressure. The same with diabetes. The second point is then the linking to factors that have been directly associated with increased risk of dementia. Hearing loss. Now, hearing loss significantly increases your risk of dementia. I'd just like to point out this. I'm talking not just about APOE in general here. I'm talking about dementia more broadly. So if you're starting to see hearing loss, get a hearing aid. Now, how this is affecting the brain, maybe it's your brain overworking because you're trying to over-listen, which creates a more metabolic demand in the brain. It is reducing your ability to create interactions with human beings around you that drives extended cognitive reserve within the brain. The second one as well is eyesight. Eyesight's another one. Make sure you look after eyesight. So these are very simple things you can do. So if you're an APOE4 carrier and you're starting to just go and get your hearing tested. Go and keep your eye tests going regularly, because this is two really important things. The second point is around education. Now there's early education in life, which which can reduce your ability to get dementia. Now, this is something you cannot necessarily modify because when you're thinking about it in your 20s and 30s and 40s, but actually progressive education throughout life is very important. So learning a language, learning an instrument, doing all these different sort of tasks and puzzles you can do, picking up new hobbies, really important for increasing cognitive reserve. And that is the key term when it comes to modifying or reducing your risk of the disease, is increasing your cognitive reserve. Now, the way you can think about this is if think about you're on a motorway or freeway, depending on what side of the pond we are, and there's a crash and you're in a queue. Now, if you have lots of side roads which you can get off at and go to your destination, that's because there's an increased network of roads. Cognitive reserve, in a way, is very similar to that, where you've got, if you have a loss of a neuronal connection or a small region of neurons in your brain, you've actually got different connections that actually can be a backup to enable you to, do the normal processes in life. And lots of education throughout life is a component of that. The hearing and the sight actually can be underpinned there as well, where actually lack of hearing and sight can increase the demand on the brain and therefore reduce your cognitive reserve. Linking then to the cognitive reserve is also exercise. So there are regions of the brain that still divide and that still are highly plastic. One of them is the hippocampus we mentioned earlier. Exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, really increases your neurodegeneration, your neurogenesis in that region, so cell division, over long periods of your life. So it can still be seen in your 50s and 60s, and I assume to older periods too. And this is so get out, lots of runs, low steady state, bit of intensive exercise if that's something you can do. Another one is grip strength, so weightlifting. Grip strength is actually a broad modifier of a lot of chronic diseases, so the diseases of aging. So lift lots of weights as well if this is something you're possible to do. But even some very simple light weights to start with, just adding some strength exercises to your day is an incredibly important modifier. There's the obvious ones then of smoking, heavy alcohol use. We touched on this in the Dr. Rupy talk about, actually there's evidence that shows that moderate alcohol use actually reduces your risk of getting dementia. Now, this sounds a little counterintuitive, but at the moment, I think the link is actually to when people are drinking, they're either relaxing, so anxiety and depression can increase your risk of dementia. But a lot of the time, it actually may be involving going to the pub with mates or, having a dinner party with friends. And it's actually this social interaction, this socialization, that is another big protecting factor of dementia. And very much so what you see, social isolation, again, broadly impacts a lot of chronic disease. But keeping in touch with friends, and you can link this then to hobbies. If you're playing golf, you're meeting your friends after a game of golf and having a beer, you see a link with religion and people who are in religious linked to churches and other religious groups and societies. And again, part of this is to do with potentially the community that it fosters. You meet all these different people, you're meeting every week, and it creates that connection with an interest, an identity. But just talking to different people, and it's making sure you have those social interactions is an essential part of not just mitigating dementia risk, but also more broadly chronic health risk as well, which is very important. So there's to finalise that as well. Then there's kind of the underpinning diet ones, and again, this links potentially to the diabetes risks and the heart disease risks as well. It's the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet. So the DASH, which is linked to reducing blood pressure. So lots of legumes, lots of greens, olive oils, good healthy fish, some white meat, lots of fibre, lots of coloured vegetables. All those to your diet again can add another string to your bow of shooting down dementia, or at least kicking the can on it for as long as possible. So going back to the question you asked at the beginning is, would I want to know? I think I would. Well, I know I would because I checked my genetic data. So and there are many things you can do to reduce the APOE risk. So in summary, I'll say that if you're APOE4, even though you are going to get a buildup of amyloid protein, which is known to cause dementia, it does not mean you're going to get Alzheimer's or dementia.
Because of those potential interventions that you can incorporate.
exactly there. And again, there's other factors. So there's other modifying genetic factors that can be a part of. So you can, even though you have an increase in APOE, you can have other protective genetic factors, but also a large proportion is going to be the maintenance of cognitive reserve, and that's something you can do something about if you're 25 or if you're 65.
So just to cover those, that's sort of cognitive stimulation in terms of continuous learning throughout your lifetime.
Yes.
Social stimulation in terms of meeting up with friends and being involved with groups and that type of thing. Exercise, so steady state as well as strength training. And then also the DASH diet was the nutrition guidance that you were providing.
The Mediterranean diets, also hearing and so hearing loss and sight loss are really important. So get your hearing tested, get your sight tested, do something about it if you're showing a reduction in those sensory faculties, and aerobic exercise too, because that very much stimulates the neurogenesis in the hippocampus, and actually the hippocampus is the region of the brain that starts to show obvious changes earlier on within the progression of the disease. Just all those facets, adding as much of that to your life as possible, and you're making some significant changes that can help you reduce your risk for sure.
Great, wonderful. And then in terms of just for our members as well, is there anything that you're currently working on, anything that's coming down the line that they can get excited about?
Yeah, lots. So when you say me, you mean my talented team?
Not you specifically, the people who actually do the work.
Yes, yeah, sure. So we're just finalising a women's health category at the minute, so that our users may have noticed we've disappeared for a month or so. We're building a women's category, things associated with early menopause, fertility, gestational diabetes, hormones. The boys won't get left out because we're moving then on to redoing all the testosterone traits and all the male hormone traits as well, expanding those out. Lots of a few more around the endurance category as well. So we're finalising the endurance category that's been sitting on the dashboard for a while. So we'll get that out to people. Lots going on. Some more traits around aging, and also we're going to readdress the blood sugar category as well, and how we can expand that out. And we're currently building some technology that enables us to start releasing quite large polygenetic risk scores, so traits that will be having many thousands of genetic variants associated with them, which is very exciting for our bioinformaticians and our clinician as well, who's, as you well know, loves his statistics and loves his predictive modelling. So that's keeping those guys busy at the minute. So lots going on. But having lots of fun.
I'm going to say we're giving too much away at this point, Stu. So
sorry. Okay, yeah. I won't talk about anything else.
I'll let you get on. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Alex. Bye.
Bye-bye.